all about the American dream. That is, if your dream involves cooking meth and killing lots of people. It's about Walter White, a high school chemistry teacher who discovers he has cancer. With lots of bills but little cash, Walter does what a lot of Americans do. He starts his own business. Unlike most small business owners, he kills 23 people and makes $80 million. You do the math. Walter's strategy from the start was to make the highest quality product on the market, 99.1% pure. In fact, his personality wouldn't let him do any different. Question: do meth heads really demand the best? Most meth is diluted by the dealers before it's sold. Theoretically, Walt's product would allow for greater dilution, enhancing profitability. However, we know that Hank's agents are finding the extreme pure stuff on the street. One possible answer: there are two meth markets. Some of Walt's pure product is finding its way into a more affluent group, what we would call a focused differentiation strategy. Lydia's exportation to users in Czech Republic tend to add support to this conclusion. Walter sees himself as unrecognized and unappreciated, the smartest guy in the room, a visionary, whether in chemistry or business. But to listen to Walter on business, he sounds like he just stepped out of a 2-hour seminar offered by Albuquerque Tech. Walter knows everything. Jesse Pinkman, his so-called partner, has his own opinion, a classic division between management and labor. Breaking Bad is about entrepreneurship. Forming a business involves a series of risky decisions. Some will pay off, most will not. We know that years ago, Walter sold a stake in a business startup for about $5,000, a stake that would have been worth millions had he kept it. For most of the show, Walter continues to make bad decisions. Only his resourcefulness and his ability to manipulate others pulls him out of the fire. For a guy with cancer, Walt is extremely lucky. I am certain that he conducted a SWOT analysis when he was totally cancer. Walter's like a lot of people starting a small business. They focus completely on the S and the O. He completely underestimates, in fact, has not a freaking clue about the T, and of course, it is his W that this whole show is about. Walter does understand the immense opportunities offered by the drug industry. There is a valid economic reason why so many poor people in desperate situations turn to dealing drugs. Michael Porter has developed an industry model that looks at 5 dynamic forces that affect overall profitability. It is this interplay between these forces that serve constraint upon strategy formation. Let's look at each of these elements from the perspective of Heisenberg Incorporated. Walter is, by definition, a new entrant. Why are there so many meth labs? Because they're cheap to set up. What did Walter need to start his business? Lab supplies, cough syrup, sales associates, an RV? Check. Substitutes. Your customers are addicts. From the perspective of an addict, meth provides great bang for the buck. Drugs are created to be non-substitutable. Except for very few episodes, the show doesn't dwell on users, except Jesse and his gang, of course. I think this was done purposely to reflect Walter's total moral blindness. He is incapable of seeing the suffering he causes, but also signals a very important change in his business strategy. Early on, his strategy was to use Jesse and his gang as his sole distribution channel. In fact, Walter wanted nothing to do with dealing drugs. He was totally into production, not distribution. But Walter wanted more money, so he convinced Jesse to approach a local drug kingpin. It is this switch of distribution models that brings Walter fully in the clutches of the drug cartel, the third or fourth worst decision in Walt's life. At this point, I've lost count. Power of suppliers. In the classroom, students' eyes glaze over when one starts talking about suppliers. However, in the world of Breaking Bad, procuring supplies to make the meth becomes one of the major story drivers. Their early procurement strategy involved using Badger and Skinny Pete not only as dealers, but as purchasers of cough syrup, a process known as smurfing. Of course, Walter's impatient with this process. He is a chemist, and damn it, he can make it himself. Walter decides they need to acquire methamphetamine in bulk rather than hitting every Walgreens in Albuquerque. And this, of course, only makes Heisenberg Incorporated bigger and bigger, a necessary step when you're breaking into warehouses and robbing trains. At the beginning of the show, Walter refuses to acknowledge that he is a drug dealer. In fact, his rationalization of his behavior depends upon the fiction that production and distribution were two completely separate businesses. As he quickly discovers, there were two functions of the same business, and as the stakes got higher, the competitors became more and more ruthless, and of course, so did Walter. Now this is where I think Walter is like so many entrepreneurs. He not only tolerated risk, but over time he learned to thrive on it. Risk became his drug of choice. Final remarks. The problem is that skill sets essential in setting up a business are not necessarily the ones you need to manage a business. In addition, over time, Walter started buying into his own marketing. Heisenberg was created to intimidate his competitors. Over time, he started to believe his own PR to tragic results. In the end, Walter might have been a good entrepreneur, but he was a horrible business person. So what's the most important lesson from Breaking Bad? To me, it's quite simple. When you get in trouble, 3 words. Better call Saul.